Hello, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us today on our final installment of this webinar series. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about data purge and transactional cleanup before you begin your journey to Cloud Suite. But before we get into all that, we'll take some time for introductions. My name is Stephanie Marquez. I'm a principal supply chain consultant here at RPI, where I've been a part of the team for about 4.5 years. I've participated in several different Infor FSM Cloud Suite implementations during my tenure. Prior to working here at RPI, I came from supply chain in the healthcare space. There I was a senior contract admin and ultimately a systems application administrator before I transitioned into consulting. However, my experience in supply chain really extends back about 14 years in a variety of different roles, from sourcing manager to buyer, receiving and logistics. So a little bit of a jack of all trades there. Ayana, I'm so glad to have you with us today. If you wouldn't mind just taking a moment to introduce yourself.
Of course. Hello, everyone. My name is Ayana Brown. I have been a supply chain consultant at RPI for a little over 2 years now. I have 20 years of Infor Lawson experience. I was hired as a temporary employee at a healthcare system in 1998 to assist with their initial implementation of Lawson version 7.2.4. So a long time ago. There, I worked my way up to materials manager and distribution center manager. And in all, I have approximately 17 years of experience in supply chain management in the healthcare setting before moving on to consulting. And I'd like to thank you all for joining us as well. We love to hear a little about you, so please feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat and share where you're joining from.
Absolutely. Today, we're going to continue our discussion on data, which we spoke about in the second installment of the series. But we're going to kind of switch gears a little bit and talk about how to approach your transactional data in preparation for a Cloud Suite implementation. So now that your data is standardized and cleaned up, we want to talk about what to consider for cleaning out that data. What could be a possible viable approach? What are some common transactional data areas that can be addressed relatively simply? And maybe what are some things to look out for? Specifically, we're going to focus a little bit in on purchase orders and vendor agreements. We'll talk about impact, risks like we do, and then ultimately how we can help. Before we get into talking about impact, I just want to make sure that everyone is aware our goal is to provide you with insight through our experiences, both as functional users of the Infor system as well as consultants, and help you really prioritize what data consider for analysis and purging or archiving. All right, let's hop to it. So I think to start us off, it's really important for us to take a moment and just break down some terminology that we're going to kind of use today in our discussion. You'll hear us refer to conversions or data conversions versus data migration. And I think it's just helpful to understand the difference between the two, just so we can continue to have effective conversation. A data conversion is when the data from your existing system, a legacy system, is converted and uploaded into Infor Cloud Suite. Typically, those uploads are done in an Excel type format. And in supply chain, we see this most applicable to customers that are brand new to Infor. I do kind of want to make note, though, that it should be said that data conversions can also be used for existing Lawson customers as well. So I think it just kind of depends on the organization and situation. A data migration is when the data from your Lawson legacy system is migrated into Cloud Suite by Infor using their data migration or DMF tooling. I just kind of want to put this out there. I want to be clear. Our discussion today is not about conversion versus migration, but I think, or Ayana and I both felt it was really important to really understand the difference between the two. So this is going to kind of segue into our discussion about cleaning out data. And Ayana, I'm curious, from your experience, what has it been with clients like that approach their implementation through a data conversion or data migration? And what are some strategies that you think folks can consider that will help during that implementation project?
Well, I've mostly worked with data conversions. And in my opinion, data conversions allow you to have better control over the data that is converted because you're building the upload files yourself. The key is cleaning up your data and mapping it to the Cloud Suite business classes and fields. Now, RPI actually developed a user-friendly interface tool to assist with this process. It allows the user to effortlessly map data fields and configure transformation rules to convert data from any system to any system, while utilizing Excel for precise cross-referencing. Now, this minimizes the amount of manipulation required for the client's data, before it's ready to import into Cloud Suite. Now, as we discussed in the second installment of this series, there's a hierarchy to building Cloud Suite, right? So I built a conversion plan that I like to use for my clients that identifies which business classes can be loaded at the same time and the order in which the loads need to occur. It makes the load process as expeditious as possible, and it's built in a way that if, God forbid, something happens to me, anyone could follow along.
Yeah, absolutely. Those data conversion plans, and we use them for migrations as well, are invaluable. Kind of just like you said, laying out that order of operation so somebody else knows what can be picked up on, maybe what can run in conjunction or in parallel with another data set, just to be the most efficient we can during, a cutover and ultimately a go live. Thank you. I appreciate that for sure. In my experience has been a little bit different here at RPI. I've actually had more clients that were existing Lawson clients and therefore used the DMF tooling. Now, I did participate in a client through a conversion process that was before the DMF tooling was available to kind of to the masses. But I think it's really important for clients to understand that regardless, right, of a conversion or a migration, that they have the ability to determine what is going to migrate into their new Cloud Suite system and what does not. And working through their existing transactional data is really going to play a large role in that. So I want to kind of give an example in regards to a data migration. A standard approach to the migration could be something like 2 years plus current. So meaning that the client's going to determine a specific date. Let's take December 1st, 2021 as our example. That would mean that the data with this date and forward through the current date, whatever that is at the time of go live, is going to be included in their data migration. Now, there are some transactional data, or there is some transactional data that's going to come over regardless of that date. So like your open purchase orders or open PO lines. So for example, if you in your system, you have an open PO, right, that dates back to 2015, maybe it just never got closed, it didn't get realized by the team, but your migration date is 12/1/2021, that PO and its detail still going to migrate even if it's from prior to that date because it's open. So something else to consider for some of our existing Lawson customers is that all of your PO25 vendor agreements, if you're using that area of the system, will come over into Cloud Suite through that DMF or that data migration, regardless of status. So closed, open, I think revision or revised is a status, and regardless of date. There are certain data areas that are considered system build by Infor, and your PO vendor agreements or PO25 vendor agreements is an example of that. So when we talk about purging, closing, deleting, it's really, really important to get nuanced and kind of in the weeds with that so you can make the best determination for your organization. Just to share with you, AJ, I had a recent experience with a client, and they discovered during their data validation process, which typically takes place after every data migration or conversion, that the migration brought over their open POs and open PO lines, which was expected. We knew that was going to happen again, regardless of that date. But all of the historical supporting data, such as receipts and invoices that they were expecting to come over as well, did not migrate because those were dated prior to the cutoff date. So it caused a little bit of confusion for them when they were going through that data validation process. And that's actually where they discovered the discrepancy was when they were validating their remaining PO balance report from Cloud Suite compared to Lawson. Their solution was to go through their Lawson system, make sure all of those old PO headers and lines were closed where it was appropriate to do so. And it was something that we and Infor strongly encouraged and recommended that they address prior to their go live. Otherwise, that PO balance report would have never footed up. Once it was discovered, I will say the client did a fantastic job. They had a lot of urgency in their efforts to address the transactional data between migrations and their go live to get it cleaned up. It definitely took some work, but this is the sort of thing that we're talking about getting ahead of before folks start those journeys into Cloud Suite. So I know that was kind of a big story, but I think it's really important just to kind of show to expect the unexpected, right? Have you ever had any experiences or had to strategize with your clients prior to converting or migrating their legacy system data that might be similar to this?
Yeah, well, first off, great story. I think it's a great example for our clients to think about themselves in that situation and say, well, how would we have handled this? And let's learn from somebody else's experiences, right?
Yes,
That's what I like anyway. um, but this is where I find that DMF might be better in this situation because bringing over PO lines and receipts is not an issue for DMF. Well, for
right.
conversions, however, we typically do not recommend loading open PO lines because the question becomes, well, what do we do with the previously received lines, right?
Hmm.
So there's an RNI balance before from the legacy system, and there are receipts in the legacy system that corresponds or makes up the balance for that RNI. Um, we can't bring in the receipt lines because it'll create a second or duplicate receipt that has already been booked to the GL. So this affects inventory balances that will need to be reversed and the RNI. And the auto reversal of the RNI is not possible because it's a different system. So this can cause confusion and a finance nightmare after go live.
Yeah, we
So
don't want that.
one client used two different systems for finance and supply chain. For Go Live, they insisted on bringing in open POs against our recommendation and literally said post Go Live that they should have just listened to our recommendation. Happens all the time. It turns out the receiving department was not receiving accurately in their legacy system. So post Go Live, they were physically receiving product that they thought was already received and
Mhm.
therefore not loaded. They were receiving invoices for lines that were previously received. Now, before Go Live, the plan for that was to pay those invoices as non-POs and note the PO in the external PO field. But post Go Live, the AP team determined they didn't want to handle it that way anymore and was insisting the buyers recreate the POs to pay the invoices, which the buyers didn't want to do, understandably. So
Nope.
it was a hot mess for a little bit. Um, but even still, throughout their implementation project, we recommended closing as many open POs as possible. And they did follow our recommendation for that. But imagine how much more chaotic it would have been had they not.
Yeah, exactly. And like a go live weekend is always super stressful as it is, and getting the system back up and in the hands of your end users always has some chaos to it. So it's again getting ahead of issues like these. And it's funny that they came back and said, "Oh, we should have listened to your recommendation." It's like hindsight is always 2020. It's
Always.
realizing it after the fact and being like, "Well, lesson learned." And like you said earlier, these stories are can be helpful to other people, hopefully learning the lessons of those that have gone through this before.
Yeah.
So I thank you for sharing that. Yeah, you don't need any extra chaos. So I think at this point in the series and even in our discussion today, starting to become a little bit clear on what some of the risks are that are associated with not, taking care of those old transactional records and determining what can be closed, purged, carried over, et cetera, into your new system. But let's take some time to kind of really break it down, right? Like, what are those risks? And I'm curious, AJ, from your perspective and in your experience, what's one of the biggest risks that a client might encounter if they don't take the necessary measures to close, clean out, and purge before they start their implementation project?
Well, one of the biggest risks is an extended downtime for Go Live. The
Yeah.
more data you're bringing in, the longer it's going to take to load. And we found this to be true whether you're using conversion or migration.
Yeah.
But you also have to consider your organization's unique situation and requirements when considering what to close, clean up, purge.
Yeah, every organization is going to be different. And bringing into your new system data that's old and not relevant, I think is just a risk within itself. I mean, we've had some clients that have been on Lawson for 20, 25 years, and I have to ask, like, is it worth it for your organization to bring in 25 years of data? Probably not. I had a colleague share a story as they were going through a big implementation project, and their client had been on the Lawson system since, I think it was like 1999. But before their project kicked off, their supply chain team, so the client supply chain team, worked with our team of consultants to identify what transactional data that they should tackle. Where were they going to get the best, bang for their buck with that initiative, so to speak? And they chose to close and purge and put an initiative into place. And an example of the data set that they analyzed was their PO25 vendor agreement data. That was one area that had just thousands upon thousands of records. And it was like, do we really need this, GPO agreement or this, local contract that we entered in the system in 1999? No. And definitely I think it was through that initiative, they analyze, right, like what do we have to bring over for compliance and just overall transacting, what accommodated any sort of legal reasons, et cetera, to keep that. And then they said, yep, we're going to get rid of all the other old ones. And I think it turned out to be like 10 to 15 years worth of old PO25 data records, again, which were thousands of records that that organization had said, you know what, we don't need these anymore. And
Wow.
it kind of,
That's
yeah,
great.
exactly. And it follows a kind of similar theme that we've discussed before and earlier in this webinar series. It's like garbage in, garbage out. Not that that data is garbage, so to speak, but like if you don't need it, why are you bringing it?
Right. Now, I picked up on that theme, and hopefully our viewers have as well. So now we've talked in specific and in general terms about the need for closing or purging data ahead of a Cloud Suite implementation. I'd also like to briefly highlight some specific questions that should be considered that will help clients on the path to determining where to start. And you've actually started us off with a great question. So, like, how much history does your organization require? You
Right.
know, what is the business reason for keeping closed data or transaction history? Now, this will help everyone be on the same page going forward. And does that data serve a purpose for the organization and team anymore? Like 20 years ago? Yeah,
Yes.
probably not. Vendors have closed down, items discontinued, like really?
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
have you considered an archiving solution like Data Lake?
Yeah.
The benefit of archiving is if you ever need to track something down in your legacy data, you can find it without bogging down your new system with years worth of data for that just in case scenario.
Yep.
So these questions really are applicable to several different businesses or business areas such as POs and receipt or vendor agreements, inventory transactions, just like you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, absolutely. I can't imagine like having all of that, 20, 25 years worth of data brought over and then having to say, okay, I need to search for such and such a record. And it just kind of, slowing your system down. But let's talk a little bit about what can we do to help, right? So now that you've considered the impact your data can have on your implementation from a lot of different kind of points of views and perspectives, you may be thinking, okay, this is great, but how are we going to tackle this? And I think that that's something that we can certainly help with. If you've been if you've been with us for the better part of this series, you know that we've said this once and I've said it a couple of different times, but there's really no one size fits all approach to any of these topics that we've discussed, especially for projects such as these. We definitely would love to be able to have an opportunity to support our clients before their Cloud Suite implementation. It helps us to become more familiar with their data as well. And certainly our clients are the experts at that, but we can partner with your teams to analyze current data. And I think you said it yesterday, it's kind of like that grunt work, quote unquote, that analyzing can take some time. We can help to identify what items need to be reviewed by your team. Whether it's, your POs or your PO vendor agreements. We can even just assist with developing a strategy and support your team and, that data closeout or that purge process just through a variety of recommendations. And just like anything that we do, we want to emphasize that this would not happen without the full participation of our clients. Our relationships with our clients really are partnerships. And again, you know your business best, you know your data best, and so therefore we rely on that partnership. And I think it's helpful to kind of know our teams here, RPI, are unique and that most of us, I think I said this earlier, and you certainly said it through the introductions, we've also come from the client side, right? So
Right.
we have lots of experience as an end user and understand kind of from that perspective what these level of effort type projects can take. Certainly we've learned from the clients that we've worked with in consulting. So we've done the projects both as consultants and functional users, which I think is pretty unique. Our objective certainly is to help our clients by positioning them for the best Cloud Suite implementation, that they or that you can have. And that certainly includes getting the maximum system functionality, operational efficiencies. So when it comes time to implement your Cloud Suite solution, you as the client can focus your efforts on designing that new system, learning that new system functionality, focusing on automation enhancements camps or other types of process improvements rather than having to play, data purge or data cleanup catch up, if you will.
And as we discussed in the second installment of the series, with the reduction in organizational budgets, many organizations believe they don't have the capital to partner with an organization like RPI to assist in these types of projects. But I might argue that organizations can't afford not to. And it's for a number of reasons, really. Like staff are generally allocated to completing their day to day with no additional help. Well, they
Right.
may have some hours, but really no additional hours for extra projects. And the risk of not doing this type of work before implementation can result in longer conversion or migration times. And these are things to consider before embarking on your Cloud Suite implementation project.
Yeah, absolutely. You don't want to be slowed down by something that could have been addressed ahead of time. I think we mentioned this
Right.
in series 2. It's like you put in the large level of effort up front and you reap the rewards of that hard work throughout your implementation project. So let's
Exactly.
kind of switch gears a little. We often get some pretty, common questions when we're talking about stuff like this. So I'd like to know from your experience, AJ, what's the most challenging part of a data conversion or migration where the client didn't take the time to address some of these existing pain points?
Well, as we mentioned earlier, the time it takes for conversion and migration is longer the more data you bring into the system. But the
Yeah.
real pain is felt post go live when you're now transacting. We load data and test multiple times throughout the project, but the extent of these decisions is not felt or fully understood until you're live and transacting.
Yeah, that's a good point because it's like we could try to simulate what that looks like as best as we can, but it's never going to be, true real life until, you have the keys to the kingdom and the system back and all of your end users are back in there. You're right. That's really kind of where it's felt. I just want to say thank you to everyone so much for being here with us today. Ayana, it's been a pleasure having you join me in this series, and I really loved learning from you and just speaking with you about all of your experiences. I know you've given me a lot to think about going forward as a consultant, and I'm sure that you've given clients out there a lot of information to consider for their own organizations as well. So I thank you.
Well, thank you all for joining this and previous sessions of our series. We hope that we've been able to articulate the importance of process optimization in the first installment to cleaning up data in the second and rounding out this series with cleaning. Let's start over. Last session was cleaning up data. This session was cleaning out data. And
Yep.
this, our final installment of the Before Your Journey to Cloud Suite webinar series.
Yeah, clean up, clean out. I like that. I want to
Clean up,
like make a
clean out.
hashtag of it. We've certainly appreciated the time that you spent out of your day to tune in with us. If there are any questions, we'd be happy to connect with you. Please feel free to reach out to us at questions@rpic.com. Additionally, please head over to our LinkedIn page where you can get the latest and greatest information about upcoming webinars such as these, boot camps, and other types of activities that we like to do with our clients. So thanks again. I appreciate everyone. AJ, have a great day, and hopefully
Thank
we'll
you,
see you guys
everyone.